Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wondered if fighting back against someone's rudeness actually makes you look better or at least less bad? Today we've got some fascinating research that dives right into that tricky question. This paper asks a really simple yet powerful question you see all over the place online and sometimes even in real life. We all know incivility, being rude or disrespectful, is generally a bad thing when someone is uncivil. We usually think poorly of them and their behavior. But what happens when someone is rude to you and you fire back with rudeness of your own? Does that make you just as bad as the first person, or does something else happen? This research suggests that maybe fighting rudeness with rudeness, or what they call retaliatory incivility, can actually get you more social rewards. It sounds a bit counterintuitive, right? It's like saying two wrongs can sometimes make things more right. Let's dive into how they figured this out. The researchers here looked at a ton of comments on Reddit. You know, that massive online community with all sorts of discussions. They wanted to see if people got more social rewards, like upvotes or positive reactions, when their rude comment was a response to someone else's rude comment, compared to when their rude comment was just out of the blue, or in response to something polite. They found that when people responded rudely to someone who had already been rude, they actually got more positive reactions. And they didn't stop there. They did more controlled experiments with people in different situations like sports fans and employees to see if this held up. And guess what? It did. It seems like being rude in retaliation can actually be seen as more virtuous and earn you some social rewards. So incivility is everywhere. The researchers note that it seems to be becoming more common lately. Usually when scientists study incivility, they focus on how bad it is. And it really is bad. It can damage teamwork, it can tire people out, and it can just make things generally unpleasant. Previous research often shows that people who act uncivilly get negative evaluation. But the paper points out something important that happens in these cycles of incivility. People often retaliate. Think about what they call clapping back or reading someone for filth. These are popular phrases for responding with a sharp, often insulting retort. This cycle where one person's incivility leads to another's incivility is really common. The researchers here are interested in the person who does the second act of incivility, the retaliator. They figured that maybe this retaliator's behavior might be seen differently. They might be seen as more justified, like they're standing up to someone who was being a jerk first. Think about it from the perspective of someone watching. If someone starts being mean, and then someone else is mean back, the second person might seem more understandable. They're not just being mean for no reason, they're reacting to someone else's bad behavior. The paper even brings up examples from the legal system where actions taken in self-defense or to punish wrongdoing might be viewed more leniently than the same actions done out of malice. They also mention how anti-heroes in stories who seek revenge are often popular. This all points to the idea that context matters, and whether your rudeness is a response to someone else's, rudeness is a big part of that context. They hypothesize that people who engage in retaliatory incivility are seen as worthier of status for their group. Scroll for all Virtue Theory of Status Attainment MVT Center. They tie this idea to something called the Moral Virtue Theory of Status Attainment. This theory suggests that when people act in ways that are seen as virtuous, they gain status within a group. And how do you act virtuous? Sometimes it means going above and beyond just following the rules. Sometimes it means doing something that might be seen as a bit outside the norm. But in service of the group, the researchers argue that retaliatory incivility could be seen that way. By punishing an uncivil instigator, the retaliator might be seen as protecting the group's dynamics or signaling that this kind of behavior is not acceptable. It's like a form of self-sacrifice because they're putting themselves out there to defend the group's norms. So the idea is that retaliators might be seen as more virtuous precisely because they are breaking some norms to uphold other, more important group norms. To test all this, they conducted a bunch of studies. They started with a big observational study on Reddit and then moved into several experimental studies to really nail down the cause and effect. This was their big dive into the Reddit data. They looked at over 2 million comments. They wanted to see if incivility that was a response to an uncivil post got more karma, which is like Reddit is way of showing social approval compared to incivility that was a response to a civil post. And in this massive dataset, they found that uncivil responses did indeed get more karma when they were in response to an uncivil post. So right from the get-go, they had evidence that retaliatory incivility gets more social rewards. Next, they took this to a controlled environment with Reddit users. They had people imagine scenarios where someone was either uncivil unprovoked or uncivil in retaliation. Then they asked people how much status they would give to the person who responded uncivilly. They also asked them if they would upvote the response. Again, They found that when the incivility was retaliatory, people saw the person as more worthy of status and were more likely to upvote them. Crucially, they also tested if this was because people saw the retaliator as more virtuous. And yes, the feeling of virtuousness was the main reason why retaliatory incivility got more status. They then looked at sports fans, specifically hockey fans. In hockey, penalties can actually hurt a team. They wanted to see if retaliatory incivility would still be rewarded even if it hurt the in-group. They presented scenarios where a player retaliated against another player's dirty hit. And even though this retaliation might lead to a penalty for their own team, people still viewed the retaliating player more favorably and as more virtuous compared to a player who acted uncivilly without provocation. They did a similar thing with baseball fans. This time, they made sure the retaliation wasn't necessarily against the original instigator, but just another member of the opposing team. And again, they found that retaliatory incivility was seen as more virtuous and earned more social rewards than unprovoked incivility. This showed that even if the retaliation wasn't perfectly targeted, it was still viewed more positively when it was a response to an initial act of incivility. Next, they moved into the workplace setting. This is a more conservative environment where incivility is usually frowned upon even more. They compared retaliatory incivility to unprovoked incivility, and also to disseminated incivility, which is when someone acts uncivilly not towards the original instigator, but towards a third party. Here, they found that when the incivility was retaliatory and directed at the original instigator, the person was seen as much more virtuous and worthy of rewards, more so than if they were just spreading the incivility around. This is key because it shows people don't just reward any second person who is uncivil, but specifically the one who is fighting back against an initial offense. This study dug deeper into the motivation behind the retaliation. They looked at whether the retaliation was perceived as being for the good of the group or more for self-interest. As predicted, when the retaliation was clearly framed as being for the good of the group, it received the highest rewards. But interestingly, even when the motivation seemed more self-protective, it still got more rewards than when there was no provocation. This suggests that as long as the incivility is in response to something, people are more forgiving. In their final experiment, they wanted to compare retaliatory incivility directly against not just unprovoked incivility, but also against neutral responses, and even against the instigator's behavior itself. They found that retaliatory incivility was indeed viewed more positively than the initial uncivil act. However, they also noted that in some cases, retaliatory incivility wasn't necessarily seen as virtuous on its own, but rather as just less bad than the initial act. It was punished less intensely. This adds a nuance. It's not that retaliatory rudeness is always actively praised, but it's definitely not punished as harshly as rudeness that comes out of nowhere. Scroll discussion Chi Center. So, what's the big takeaway from all these studies? The core finding is consistent. Retaliatory incivility tends to receive more social leniency and rewards than instigatory or unprovoked incivility. People see it as more virtuous, and this perception of virtue drives the rewards they bestow. This challenges the common idea that two wrongs never make a right. In the realm of social interaction, especially when someone has already been wronged, responding with incivility can be seen as a defense of group norms or a form of justice rather than just petty meanness. These findings have some important implications. For one, they show that our understanding of how people regulate relationships needs to go beyond just looking at extreme violence. Even subtle forms of behavior like incivility are judged based on context. They also highlight that the sequence of events really matters. The act that precedes incivility can completely change how it is perceived. What might be seen as a negative behavior in isolation can be viewed much more positively when it's a response to a similar negative behavior. Now, no study is perfect, and the researchers are upfront about that. They mentioned that their measures for virtuousness, while consistent, haven't been statistically validated in every possible way. They also note that most of their studies were done in the US, and these findings might vary in different cultural contexts. Plus, they point out a really interesting avenue for future research. How do we evaluate retaliators who are part of marginalized groups like women of color? Given that women, especially women of color, sometimes face backlash for being assertive, how would they be judged when they retaliate? It is a complex area. They also bring up the black sheep effect, where people might judge in-group members who behave badly even more harshly. So the in-group versus out-group dynamic and how it interacts with retaliation is a really fertile ground for more research. In conclusion, this research offers a fresh perspective on incivility. It's not just about the act itself, but the story behind it. When rudeness is a response to prior rudeness, it can shift from being a negative behavior to something that's viewed with more leniency, seen as more virtuous, and even rewarded. This is a powerful reminder that human social dynamics are incredibly nuanced and context dependent. So, what do you think about these findings? Does this change how you view online arguments or even real-life disputes? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into psychology research, please give this video a like and subscribe to Rubin's Mind Lab for more fascinating insights. We've got lots more science to explore together. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.